And welcome back to REDtalks.live. I am your host, Nathan Pierce, and with me is someone I can only describe as the API whisperer, if there is such a thing in our industry, and that is KinLane. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing all right today. How are you?
I am doing fabulous. Now, if you don't know who KinLane is, then you probably need to go to his website, which is
APIevangelist.com.
Sounds like someone who works a lot with APIs. Otherwise, you're just hijacking a domain from someone else, which I'm sure you're not. So I've learned a lot just from conversations I've had with him. He's been on this episode before, and it's super exciting to have him come on while we're running our API chaining challenge. There's a lot of engineers and consultants I know that are stuck at home, used to traveling to see customers, might have a little extra time. So we thought I would set up a couple of weeks worth of challenges for people to do. And API chaining's been launched, and who better's opinion and take to get on this than the API whisperer himself, KinLane. So API chaining, what's all that about?
Yeah, so I mean, API chaining is the next logical step in API usage, I guess. Is an API call is basically calling a single API. You make a request, you get back a response, and then API chaining is taking that response that you get back and sending all or part of it to another API and getting back another response. So there's many examples, endless amounts of examples of that. I think you in your walkthrough, you had your introduction to this had the Chuck Norris pull a Chuck Norris quote and then pass it into the Yoda API, and then you get back a Yoda. There's many other examples, silly and not so silly, that you could do for business purposes, for personal purposes. Every time one of your friends tweets, you could retweet it, automatically. You could publish it to a spreadsheet if you wanted to organize tweets from many different accounts. And then some people, I think, might be more familiar with API chaining in a concept of like, if this, then that, which is a popular consumer tool to be able to, if this happens over here, then do this with that. And that's a parallel kind of API chaining concept, because it's enabled through some of the same mechanisms. I say we would chain regular APIs together. And I just happen to, I'm API evangelist, but I also happen to work for POSTMAN, and POSTMAN is one of the best tools out there for chaining, not just making calls to single APIs, but also chaining them together.
Well, I'm going to jump in there. There is a reason that I created the demonstration for this event using Postman, because it intuitively supported exactly what I wanted to achieve. Just looking at the tool, the fact that I could throw some JavaScript in between two transactions and say, I want you to pluck this key value pair out and send it over there. And it was 2 lines. I could have just put it on 1 line with a semicolon between the two. That's cheating. 2 lines of code, and I was able to chain together 2 things and then just export that and dump it into a repo. It's a JSON file anyone can consume. Now, that to me is not just a tool. I mean, that is just an operational lifestyle choice that I like to be on board with.
Yeah, Postman definitely makes it easy to, I mean, at first glance, I would say it's akin to kind of a browser. I mean, you could make some of these API calls in a browser, especially the public ones that you highlighted in the intro to this week. For API chaining, there's a bunch of public websites out there that you can just call the URL, get back JSON, and do something with it. Problem in the browser is, what can you do with it in the browser? You can see it, but browsers are meant for HTML, and Postman's meant for making calls to APIs and working within the JSON, the XML, and that machine readable data you're going to get back. And in Postman, you can then save that file locally. You could save it to another place, like that could be the chaining. You could just be saving that response to Amazon S3 or to Dropbox or to GitHub, or you can publish it to the environment as you did in your Chuck Norris Yoda one. Is you can take that response and save it to an environment and then use it in other subsequent future calls that you're going to make, either this initial, the immediate chained one or other future ones. And so Postman just makes it easier to work with APIs, to see what's going on, and then work with those responses you get back.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fabulous tool. I was trying to work with someone's very poorly documented GraphQL interface, and doing it outside of Postman burnt a lot of cycles. And then when I saw the GraphQL come through on the Postman Canary release, which is the I guess not the official release, it's the beta kind of features come through. I jumped on that and just, being able to import the schema and have it tell me while I'm typing, oh no, it wants to see this. And just the difference that made to me making sense of this really badly documented API. I can't believe I even tried it outside with that. So yeah, it makes a difference. Those little features, like almost linting of the API, like that I get to do is something I couldn't do without, really.
It's really one of those Swiss Army knives for developers as far as making sense of what APIs are, crafting the request you need, seeing the response, seeing the header, seeing what's going on under the hood with it, and then that ability to do things with the response and then chain API calls together and then automate that is really there's just endless number of possibilities. And I think that public list of APIs, I'm going to be going through it as part of your API chaining week and grabbing all the ones that don't require a key, because that's onboarding with a new API and getting a key isn't always as easy as you like to think it is. So I'm going to focus on the ones that just have that are publicly available. And I'm going to put them all into one Postman collection and kind of organize them by folder, because that list you shared is categorized. There's space APIs, there's water APIs, there's different ones. There's funny, there's movie, videos, TV. So I'm going to make a single collection, and then you can share it as part of the public notes that really just demonstrates what's possible, replicating what's on that repo. But on the repo, you have to click to the site of the API. You have to learn what the API does. You have to grab the URL, put it into Postman. This will save people some steps, I think, as far as A, finding new and cool APIs, B, learning Postman, and then C, being able to quickly chain some of them together in some interesting.
That's going to be super helpful, especially with those less familiar with working with public APIs. And to resonate your point, when I set out to do the initial example, what I really wanted to do was actually make a call to like Google Maps and get some longitude and latitude. And I found some fun stuff online where you could like pick up the most popular tweet hashtag bit that's trending within a certain range of your address. And I was like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to find out from Santa Rosa's kind of, and then what happened? I mean, a few years ago, you could do that, but now I have to fill out a form to get a Google developer API token. And then that takes sometimes days, sometimes weeks. If you've done it through the Google Analytics, it can take months. And I was just like, oh, wow. And then I got to Twitter and the same. It was like, you need a developer token. Then you need to make a call to Yahoo to get the WOIED, the Where on the Internet ID, WOE ID, which is run by Verizon, which actually isn't available. And I just was like, wow, what we need is a list that we can work with, which is what you just said you're going to be providing. So that's fantastic. Let's just cut all that noise out, because I hit a lot of walls. And this was like Sunday night before launching this week. And I was like, oh my God, I need a working chain. So appreciate you doing that work for us.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the friction with onboarding with a lot of new APIs makes my job harder, because I get people excited about APIs, especially the Twitter API is a common one. And then I'm like, oh, before you can put this example I gave you to work, you've got to jump through all these hoops and it frustrates me. But we can share some of the more public ones, and we can encourage people to make more public ones. And so hopefully this will help perpetuate, APIs being easier. So
totally. Now, I mean, not to totally pick on like the ones that do require like an API token. I get why they do that, because then they're able to identify developers. They want them to register if they're going to be running an app on it, and they can do rate limiting and protect their resources from other users. Like there are reasons behind some of these things. But as far as a kind of education and awareness and campaigning of like what API chaining is about, it's much easier to do without that additional learning curve of how to set up a developer token and all those things like that. Yeah, that's what we're doing here. We're cutting all that out and just going with the open ones, which is why my big idea of trends based on GeoIP databases quickly became, how can I make Chuck Norris quotes sound like Yoda? And that one works for free.
Well, and the two sides of the chain, I would say that, there's a lot of public APIs that you can just pull data from for the first side of the chain. But then if you want to post some data to something, that's going to be different, because gets, to use, HTTP verbs or methods are easier, and the web's built on gets. We all get things. But post, to be able to post, you have to have usually some sort of credentials and authentication. So being able to post data is going to be a little trickier and stuff. But I think the Yoda one was a pretty good example of that. I would say we probably want people to know they could chain data by pulling from one, pulling from another, and then aggregating it into something, and then just sharing that. That's, I think, a valid. But get creative. I'm not going to limit people, because you can post to GitHub, Dropbox, Flickr. There's many ways you can post data, but you're probably going to need a key. It just depends on how far people want to go. So.
Great advice. And I like that you brought it back to the objective here is to get creative. This isn't about the person who's got the most calls in their collection. It's about the interesting result and thinking out of the box. What can I get out of these publicly available resources on the internet without having to go to a browser? Like, to actually just use these services to create something, because at the end of the day, I mean, this is a huge industry, businesses that actually create services based on an API mashup, which is slightly different from API chaining by my book. The mashup being where they're presenting an API that uses multiple APIs in the back end. So there's entire apps out there, paid for apps. They don't actually have data and services of their own. They're just aggregating and bringing that into one place. And all you see is their single API front end. So it's a big thing, and it's really worth kind of looking into this and understanding kind of how this chaining works, because it exposes to you how those apps on the internet that really are using, like, they're front ending some Google here, some Microsoft there, and a bit of Amazon, and suddenly you've got this great service that only adds value when you bring those together as one.
Yeah, and I think that's, for me, a lot of the oxygen gets sucked out of the room by people evangelizing a single API as a provider, or consumer saying, this API is the one, Twitter, Twilio, you hear a lot of the stories, and that's great. That's a big part of it. But as you point out, there's all these other more obscure APIs out there that are super interesting, super valuable, all by themselves. But then when you start matching them together and actually chaining them, you get this cumulative effect. And what's great for APIs for me is, and the free public list you shared kind of demonstrates this, is you can find something that interests you, because honestly, APIs are pretty boring. To get people interested in them, you have to kind of bring it home, in some way. And so if they're a photographer, there's photography APIs. If you like space, you, in your previous one, solved the problem that I have every day. Am I on water or am I on land? Several times a day, I'm just like, I need to know this. And so there's all of these different APIs out there. There's weather APIs, there's music APIs, there's history APIs. So that, I think, hopefully will light the fire under people and their creativity.
I actually used the iTunes API when I was experimenting for the demo one, and I was taking the Yoda response and trying to do iTunes library searches based on the Yoda version of a Chuck Norris quote. Unfortunately, it was so crazy that it kept coming back with zero response, and I had to give up on that one. There are no songs named after any Yoda phrases that have been translated, but that's fair. I can't argue with iTunes on that one. It really had no idea what I was putting in there.
Nice. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I hope people get out of it, is they just learn about new APIs. I mean, people always ask me where they should start. I'm like, pick a topic you're interested in, add API to it, plug it into Google and go, and start playing, because you're going to find something that you're interested out there, and it'll get people motivated, I hope. And then hopefully when it comes to, chaining week, that they'll get creative about what they're doing. I will throw one third dimension that I don't think people always think about, is what I call scrape-APIs. And so in Postman, I'll share some of these links with you for the show notes. But scrape-APIs are, Postman collection, or a Postman collection is a single or multiple requests, or one single API request organized into a collection. And that allows you to, say, have Twitter API, or we'll use your Chuck Norris and Yoda as two requests in a single collection. So that's a Postman collection. And that allows you to call Chuck Norris, grab the response, send it to the Yoda API. Now, when you're making one of these collections, because that call is calling a URL to an API that's public, you can actually call web pages and pull the HTML from those web pages too. And I have a couple collections that have a little JavaScript. You were playing around with Postman a little bit, and you notice when you make an API call and when you get that response back, there's an opportunity to put a script at the request and a script at the response. And so you can write a script. That's how you took the Chuck Norris quote and then put it in the environment and then called the Yoda API. That script I have made so it'll grab the HTML response and then grab some number, grab a section of text, and grab something in there, and then show you that and make it so you can just then save that, publish that to another API. So you could pull from an HTML page and then publish to an API. So I'll add another dimension. Just now that I'm saying it, sounds like it sounds maybe we're going too far for this challenge, but I just want people to know that you can create scrape APIs, and because the web and APIs live in harmony, you can pull data from websites and publish them to APIs.
That's very exciting, because there were a few I come up with where the data would have just made a brilliantly funny demonstration, but the sign up for the API in time for this challenge was too inhibitive. But I could have totally just pulled that off the web version. So I might have a revisit of some of the crazy ideas I came up with now that I know about this scrape AI business.
Yeah, I'll share that collection I'll create a little generic one and document it well so that people know how to because you got to know how to reverse engineer the web page a little bit to get what you want. But once you figure it out, it's pretty slick. It's a pretty quick way to pull data from a web page. So.
Oh, that is awesome. So, well, thank you for contributing with this. It's great to have, I mean, who better than the API whisperer himself, who's just taught us how to API-ify a web page. This scrape, that's fantastic. So thanks for putting these collections together. We'll get them out when they're available, and I'll send another message out to everyone that they're there. But yeah, this has been fun. And we kind of came up with another idea, a later challenge that we might do just before this meeting. So I know we're meant to be having a lift on the quarantine coming up, so we might have to call this the post-quarantine challenge if we run out of weeks and keep this going. So yeah, love to hear people's feedback, questions, comments, etc. If you want to know how to do some of these things in Postman or need a bit of help with those scripts, I can definitely throw some links to the documentations, great documentation available for how to do this stuff in Postman. So don't be afraid to reach out. I think that was about it, unless there was anything else you wanted to share, Ken?
No, I look forward to seeing what people build, and let me know if you have, anyone has questions about collections or interesting APIs. Happy to chime in online and help out.
Awesome stuff. Well, that closes this episode. Thanks, Ken, and listeners, thanks for listening.